Judges 11 is one of the saddest and most gruesome texts in the Hebrew Bible. It tells the story of a father sacrificing his own daughter as a burnt offering to God. It is one of the texts that Phyllis Tribble famously named a text of terror, and rightly so. And my goal today is to convince you that fan fiction provides an excellent methodology for interpreting this Bible story. We'll start with an overview of the story and a little bit about why fan fiction might provide a good methodology. And then we'll look at 3 different popular practices within the world of fan fiction. Alongside those practices, we'll look at what I'm calling historical fan fictions of Judges 11, Pseudo-Philo's Biblical Antiquities, Peter Abelard's poem, The Lamentations of the Virgins of Israel over the Daughter of Jephthah, and Georg Friedrich Handel's opera, Jephthah. And finally, we'll look a little bit at some of my own work on a Judges 11 fan fiction. So first, in case you are not familiar, the story of Judges 11 tells us about Jephthah, who was a judge and military leader over Israel. He led the Israeli military into battle against the Ammonites, and in the midst of battle, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, saying, "If we are victorious, then I will sacrifice to you the first thing that emerges from my home when I return home." Israel is victorious. Jephthah returns home, and from his door emerges his only child, his daughter, playing the tambourine and dancing to welcome him back home. Jephthah falls to his knees, wailing, saying, "Oh, daughter, you have brought me low." He explains the vow that he made, and the daughter comforts him, saying, "You must fulfill the vow you have made, but first allow me and my friends to go into the mountains for 2 months to mourn my fate." Jephthah agrees. They go to the mountains for 2 months, and when they return, Jephthah fulfills his vow. It's a horrendous, awful, violent story. So why on earth would I suggest that we use fan fiction to help us understand? I actually think this text is a great opportunity to utilize fan fiction. In the article, I Wrote My Way Out, Embodied Appropriation, Fan Fiction, and the Book of Esther, Esther Brownsmith writes, "Fan fiction is a democratic genre, and the demographics of modern fan fiction readers and writers are predominantly non-male and non-straight, a tendency that explains the frequency with which fan fiction challenges norms of gender and sexuality. In contrast, literacy was likely an elite privilege in the ancient world, one that frequently excluded marginalized genders." Now here, Brownsmith is referring to a study of the popular fan fiction platform Archive of Our Own, also known as AO3, from 2023, that breaks out the demographics of users of that platform, finding that most users were either cisgender women or were genderqueer in some way, whether that's trans, agender, gender nonconforming, or non-binary, or something else. This suggests that most producers and consumers of fan fiction are gender minorities in one way or another. In contrast, those who wrote down the words of Scripture, even if you believe that the words of Scripture were divinely inspired, those who wrote the words down were primarily from one demographic, that is, educated men. And their experiences shaped the way that they wrote those words. So, when a non-male character emerges in Scripture, it provides an opportunity for the fanfiction writer to explore ideas and perspectives that may have never occurred to the original author. Now, even if you are skeptical that fan fiction should not be applied to biblical interpretation, our story, our text today, actually invites us into an imaginative engagement with the text. The story does not end with the sacrifice of the daughter. There's another verse and a half after that read, "So there arose an Israelite custom that for 4 days every year the daughters of Israel would go out to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite." The Hebrew word here that's translated as lament is tanah. This word only occurs in one other place in the Hebrew Bible, Judges 5, the Song of Deborah, which reads, "To the sound of musicians at the watering places, there they repeat the triumphs of the Lord, the triumphs of his peasantry in Israel." The object of the verb tanah here is the triumphs of the Lord. This suggests that things that are tanad are things worthy of honor and celebration. Yes, of course, the daughters of Israel lamented the loss of their sister and mourned her early death, but they also celebrated her, commemorated her, and lifted up her story in memory. By telling her story, we're already engaging in a subversive act. The author of Judges 11 tells us very, very little about the character of the daughter. But we do know that she played the tambourine, she danced, she had friends who cared very deeply about her. Surely there is much more richness to this character that we can engage with by utilizing the practices of fan fiction. The first fan fiction practice that we will look at, and I will just note, these do not define fan fiction, but they are common practices within fan fiction. The first one we will look at is providing a name to the nameless. For example, in L. Frank Baum's classic novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, he introduces us to the character of the Wicked Witch of the West. But he doesn't provide her with a name, nor does the 1939 movie adaptation of that novel, just a judgmental title. But fan fiction authors who have sought to redeem or at least complicate the character of the Wicked Witch of the West have provided her with a name. For example, the ABC television show Once Upon a Time introduced us to Zelena. And of course, Gregory Maguire's novel Wicked introduced Elphaba Throp, who then comes to life in the Broadway musical and the recent film adaptation of that musical. Now, in our text in Judges 11, the daughter is not given a name. She's simply referred to as the daughter. Scholars will often just transliterate Bat Jephthah, which means daughter of Jephthah, and refer to her this way in their writings. But in naming her this way, we tie her intrinsically to the man who killed her, implying that her familial relations and her death are the only things worth remembering about her. Thankfully, we have some historic fan fictions that help us address this issue of namelessness. In Pseudo-Philo's Biblical Antiquities, he names the daughter Selah. He writes, "And Jephthah returned in peace, and the women came out to meet him with dances. And he had an only begotten daughter. The same came out first in the dances to meet her father. And when Jephthah saw her, he fainted and said, Rightly is thy name called Selah, that thou shouldst be offered for a sacrifice." Peter Abelard follows in this tradition and also refers to the daughter as Selah. Meanwhile, Georg Friedrich Handel refers to the daughter as Iphis. In his opera, some angels intervene to prevent the sacrifice from happening, and the angels say, "Happy Iphis shalt thou live, while to thee the virgin choir tune their harps of golden wire, and their yearly tribute give. Happy Iphis, all thy days, pure angelic virgin state, shalt thou live, and ages late crown thee with immortal praise." Our second fanfiction practice is playing with gender. Now, as we discussed, most producers and consumers of fanfiction are gender minorities, so it makes sense that this is a common focus for those who are writing and reading fanfiction. For example, within the Sonic the Hedgehog fandom, there is a very popular headcanon that Sonic is a trans mask hedgehog. This is based on the fact that he doesn't exhibit the typical chest fur of other male hedgehogs, and he does exhibit the arm and muzzle coloring of a female hedgehog such as Amy. This popular headcanon has resulted in hundreds of fan fictions exploring the life of Transmasonic on archive of our own. Now, in our text, the daughter is referred to as a Betula, which is to say a virgin or a young unmarried woman or teenager, more realistically. In the setting of ancient Israel under the judges, a young unmarried woman had zero power. All of her power fell to her father, or if she was married, her husband. But since the daughter in our story is not married, her father has full control over her life. In Peter Abelard's telling of the story, he plays around a lot with the gender of the father and the daughter. In his telling, when Jephthah first tells the daughter, Selah, about the vow that he made, Selah confronts him and refers to their ancestor Isaac, who was also demanded as a sacrifice from God, but was prevented from being sacrificed at the last moment. Selah says, "He who spurned a boy, if he accepts a girl, think what an honor it would be to my sex. Behold, she who is the fruit of your womb, what glory this would be for me, for you. As in sex, so in spirit, be now a man, I pray." In saying this, Selah not only claims for herself the role of a male, but of a patriarch of Israel. And she refers to her father's womb, gender bending him, referring to him as a woman, and essentially tells him to man up and fulfill the vow he made. I acknowledge the excitement that Selah has about being sacrificed is very problematic, and the way she talks to her father is very misogynistic. But what she does with this gendered rhetoric is she uses the patriarchy that has failed her to shame the man who has failed her and to claim honor for herself. Now, Handel is not as explicit in the way that he plays around with gender in this story, but in naming the girl Iphis, he is making an allusion to a very complex vision of gender in Greek mythology. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, we learn of a baby born female who is raised as a boy and given the name Iphis, which is a gender neutral name. When Iphis grows, she desires to be made fully into a male because she is in love with Ianthe, another woman. And Iphis and her mother, Telethusa, pray to the goddess Isis, pleading to make the transformation fully of Iphis into a man. And Isis provides and transforms Iphis into his preferred form as a man so that he can be with his love, Ianthe. Ovid writes, "There is more vigor in her than she showed in her girl ways, for in the name of truth, Iphis, who was a girl, is now a man. Make offerings at the temple and rejoice without a fear. They offer at the shrines an add votive tablet on which this inscription is engraved. These gifts are paid by Iphis as a man, which as a maid he vowed to give." In naming the daughter Iphis, Handel is alluding to this story and this vision of transmasculinity and gender fluidity. Our third fan fiction practice is filling in the gaps in a story. For example, in Star Trek, the original series, we first meet Khan in the episode Space Seed. And then 15 years later, both in our universe and within the Star Trek universe, we meet Khan again in the feature film Wrath of Khan. But we're not told what happens in those intervening 15 years. Enter fan fiction, such as Greg Cox's novel Terrain in Hell, which provides an explanation of what may have happened in those 15 years. Our Bible text has tons of gaps in it that could be addressed. One example is when the daughter asks to go to the mountains to mourn her fate with her friends. She mentions that she wishes to bewail her virginity. Now, the term Betula that we discussed earlier doesn't necessarily mean exactly what we imagine virginity to mean in our context, but it's likely that Handel did interpret it that way. And in his telling of the story, he introduces a beloved Hamor for the daughter Iphis. They are longing for each other throughout the story, and at the end of the opera, must say goodbye to each other. Iphis says, "My faithful Hamor, may that providence which gently claims or forces our submission direct thee to some happier choice." And Hamor says, "Freely I to heaven resign all that is in Iphis mine." In Peter Abelard's telling, he wonders what did the friends who were in the mountains with the daughter do when it came time for the actual sacrifice to be made. And he paints this beautiful story of bridesmaids preparing a bride for her wedding, though of course in this case it's not a wedding, it is a sacrifice. Abelard writes, "One girl hands her linen, moistened with her tears, another holds the crimson silk, wet with weeping, then a necklace laden with gold, with gems and pearls, gives her such grace that she herself lends it grace." This all brings me to my own fan fiction of this story. I have, for the past 4 or 5 years, been working on a novel that tells this story from the daughter's point of view, as well as from her friends and some other women's point of view. In it, I follow Pseudophilo's tradition and name the daughter Sela. I also provide names for the friends who go to the mountains with her. These are all Semitic names with different meanings that fit the characteristics of those women. I play around with gender with a gender fluid imaging of who God is, in their case, the king in the novel. And those women also deal with the laws of their society and what it says about women and what a woman must be, and wrestle with what it means that they don't fit those expectations of gender. And finally, I really play around with filling the gaps. In particular, I try to fill one major gap in the story, which is to ask what these women did while they were in the mountains for 2 months, something that the Bible tells us nothing about. With all of this in mind, I really hope that you yourself will use fan fiction in your own work, that you will bring marginalized voices and perspectives to the forefront of your research, that you will look for gaps in the stories you work with and wonder about what may have been happening in there, and that you will have a lot of fun engaging with these texts imaginatively. Thank you very much, and a special shout out to Abby Warrington and Shelby Hall for insights into their fandom specialties.